Why and how photography? It's a very good question right now. And it's a question I'm continuously and continually asking myself. But if I think back to where it started, it began really as a kid. I was fascinated by photographs. I didn't own a camera, but looking at family pictures was interesting to me, and I guess one picture in particular of my grandmother when she was a teenager at a wedding, and it was interesting to me, as a small child, I couldn't really understand the sort of that figure, that image of this young woman, and then knowing that it was an image of it was a picture of my grandmother who was an old woman, and as a child it was difficult for me to somehow connect that shift of time. If I try to look over my work and the things that have drawn me, I think it's about fragility, and I think that's to do with the fragility of people, the fragility of the land, how we mark the land, how we're touched by the land, how our bodies and faces seem to be marked by our horrible histories. Thinking about the realities East and West, I guess it's about people's dreams and desires, and both in my opinion, systems that don't work. But nevertheless, I think people have hopes and dreams, and I think whether you're from the East or whether you're from the West, there's a very sort of human need and desire for, I guess, simple things, opportunity, possibility. When I spoke about the American dream, it exists everywhere in the world. I think human beings have that same desire for, to get by, for things to be possible for them. It's a massive privilege to be able to cross borders, and for me, I don't like borders. I think borders are a man-made construct. We created them, and I would prefer if there were no borders. But there are, and I guess in the Black Sea I spoke about the only real border being the sea, and again there's a sort of paradox in a way, because the sea separates us, and yet it's also brought us together. And for me that's interesting, and the sea in a way represents something that's without prejudice, it's without politics, and so I really like the sea as an entity that's without prejudice. Thinking about borders not in a geographical sense, so the work addresses notions and ideas of border in that geographical sense, but I'm also interested in borders, the border between being a child and becoming an idea of self, so that border between childhood and the transition into being an adult, and the border between consciousness and unconsciousness. These are things that are interesting to me, how we see what we see, and what's a conscious thing and what's something that the camera sees but we see somehow unconsciously, and I think that's important so speaking about the young woman in on the cover of the book, I hadn't noticed that what's written as a kind of necklace says "young heart, old soul," and it's interesting looking at tattoos because they're both private and public. When I consider a journey, of course, maybe cliche, but life is a journey. I think for me, photography has been a personal journey as well as a physical journey. So it's a journey for me, it's more about a sense of movement or growth. It's a way to understand the world that I live in, to begin to articulate something about that world. Yes, to try to understand it, and I guess in a way photography has been that tool for me to begin to try and articulate something about what I see, what I understand. The world to me is a very violent place. Everything is fragile. It seems to me there will always be wars, there will always be haves and have-nots. We human beings have forgotten who we are, constantly searching for meaning. There is no meaning, and yet it is full of meaning. And there's a wonderful quote by Lauren Isley. Every time we walk along a beach, some ancient urge disturbs us, so that we find ourselves shedding shoes and garments or scavenging amongst seaweed and whitened timbers like the homesick refugees of a long war. Mostly the animals understand their roles, but man, by comparison, seems troubled by a message that is, it is often said, he cannot quite remember or he's gotten wrong. Bereft of instinct, he must search continually for meaning.